Hello everyone, welcome to the next session, a conceptual overview of ASP.NET Core. So till now we have touched upon what is .NET Core, how to actually start working on it. So you just got the gist of how you can simply start or create a new project, whether using Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code. So in this video, we're just gonna get a conceptual overview of what ASP.NET Core and how the project will look like, and how our different components get stitched together. So let's see, the first and the foremost thing about an ASP.NET Core application is the startup class. The startup class is just a normal CLR class, C# class, or VB.NET or whatever language you write. So basically, just a class which should have two methods: configure services and configure. And we also have basically another plugin which basically gets our runs startup. So any ASP.NET Core application is under the hood is like a console application, and the main gets called. See, the normal console application, the void main gets called, and in the void main we basically set up our startup class and say. So you can actually give any class for that matter, but as per the convention we'll use something like startup. Okay, so let's see how this is done in Visual Studio. You can see that I have a startup class here, class startup, and it has you can also have a constructor, but it's not mandatory always. So you have configure services method and configure. Okay, so you have two methods. So this is the building block of an ASP.NET Core application. So you have a simple class with two methods, configure and configure services. And you can actually see that in the main, all I did was set up or run the startup. So you can actually change this to another class name, but this is where how you wire up your startup class. So now we have configure services and configure two methods defined in this class. And let's see what is a service. Okay, so a service is a component that is needed to be used in our application. We basically consume a service. You can think of it like, say you have a logging service which logs to say a text file, or you have some service which should basically fetch you from the DB. For example, you have entity, you're using the entity framework to fetch, and the service is something which gives you that entity framework and fetching the data. So that's a class which gives you all that utilities. So like that, you can think of it like a service, which basically a component uh, should be consumed by the application. And another thing about ASP.NET Core is that ASP.NET Core gives you dependency injection out of the box. You don't have to use any third-party tool like Unity or an inject or simple inject or any of that third-party tools. You have IOC built in, and the services and IOC go together. Say you can say that I want this type of service. You can actually register in your config method and do that. Let's see how that is done. So here I have configure services, and basically I said, okay, I need to get an entity framework, or I need to get MVC required stuff, and like that. And then here is what our IOC stuff basically says. If somebody asks for an email center, we get auth message center. So this is how you wire up. So we will talk about detail in all these things, but for now you just have to understand that we have configure services and configure. Okay, and configure is where you basically configure pipeline. Think of it like your web.config file, or where you put your modules and handlers. So here you basically says, okay, I have these classes or components, process my request. So you can actually do that in the configure, and that is what this method is used. So when you say configure, or get the request, the next term which comes to us is middleware. Middleware is something where ASP.NET Core, using ASP.NET, in the ASP.NET Core, you basically have a request pipeline, a HTTP pipeline. If this type of request comes, say you want to return a request, if the request comes like this, you will have a middleware for that. So an example is MVC is developed as a middleware, and if you get a request like home/index, this middleware should go to the home controller and execute the index method. So that's one thing. So another is So you have a static file, and static file is something like you have a HTML or JS file, and a request comes, account slash home dot HTML, and only if you have the middleware which can handle this, that handle a request to a static file, then only it can serve that. So that is what middleware is. That's where you plug different parts of your pipeline, request pipeline, and makes it a complete web application. Okay, so you can configure that. So how do you do that? You basically do that in the configure method, and here you basically set up, you want MVC, you want static file and stuff like that. So here I have use MVC, and you basically define your routes and other things which you used to do with your normal ASP.NET or ASP.NET MVC application. Okay, so let's go back to this guy. So we have a middleware. Now we discussed a startup class, we have a middleware. So these are main two concepts in ASP.NET Core. If you actually see or compare with our old ASP.NET application, you had web.config file where you specify modules and handlers, and you had HTML or ASPX pages and stuff like that. In this case, the whole concept is being changed, and the new concept is basically we have a startup class and a middleware and services. And the next is so now these three things constitute our web application, ASP.NET Core application. But another speciality of ASP.NET Core application is it is made in such a way that you can even the servers also are abstracted. So ASP.NET does not, old way of doing it was ASP.NET can only run on say IIS, because it has tied so many things to the configuration system which we used. For example, web.config only IIS can understand, and if you look at other applications, it cannot really understand that part. And many such things which a lot of things were tied to IIS server, or IIS Express we use. But in this case, you can even implement your own servers if you other adheres to that the confirmation or the standard with the server implementation. So the server is ASP.NET Core has also gives a hosting model which does not directly listen for requests, but instead of feature implementation which is provided by the spec. Okay, so because of that, ASP.NET Core supports IIS. You can do self-hosting. We have another server called Kestrel, and you can even run or develop your own application, your own server as well. So as per if you adheres to the spec. So the next thing is the major difference is we have something called web root. So let's go back to our web application, and you see here we have web root, and you can see that we have JS images and stuff, even web.config there. But how this is different with the old version is that in the oldest ASP.NET days, say I had the startup.cs file residing inside my one directory where my application is. Okay, so if a request comes for startup.cs, what we normally get HTTP forbidden handler. So it was kind of like a blacklist approach, okay, where we put everything inside our application, the same place where all the application request comes, and even that includes our JS files, SPX, static files, everything is in the same directory, and we have specific handlers set so that if a request comes for this, don't give the response, instead give a different response. But what happened with webroot is webroot follows a whitelist approach. So whatever you put inside the web root, that is only accessible, and you don't have to worry about what you put outside the web root. And that is what you set this with the configuration. So having said that, how was the configuration? We have something called project.json which defines our configuration. So this kind of replaces our old web.or config files. Okay, the config files can still be used if you are hosting on ASP.NET Core on IIS, because IIS still understands. But other server application or other Kestrel, for example, Kestrel, or if you self-host, you can define your own configuration, and you don't really are tied to web.config mechanism. And the next thing is we see that this config is there configuration. So let's see how it is done. So let me go to you can actually see a couple more things here. One is you have uh, you have your command section and your framework section. We'll get to the details of this, when we go along. So for now, you just have to understand that we have project.json file, which basically is your web.config file if you are coming from a ASP.NET old ASP.NET background. But otherwise, this is your configuration. This is where you say my application uses these libraries, and this is the framework I am running. And it also you can also say that this is the port which it listens on, and all these details we specify in the project.json file. This is your config system. So we will go to the detail of this in the next video, how project.json basically works. So that's about configuration. And now we have covered a couple more new concepts which is different from our old way of doing things. Okay, one is we have a completely new startup.cs file, which is where you define how your application is wired up, uh, basically which dependencies you need and what is the request pipeline and all these things. And the next is middleware. Middleware is something which basically handles your request or response. So you can think of middleware as the extension block where if you want to serve a particular kind of request, you basically write a middleware, and that's our extension point. You can compare that to a module or handlers which we do with SP, the old SP.NET. Okay, and that's the major things we have covered. So please watch the next video to get more understanding on or how we can utilize project.json, or how we can use what is actually middleware, and more about each of these concepts we just covered. Okay, so thank you for watching. Please watch the next video to get more understanding on ASP.NET Core. Thank you.